We have an active shooter.
Let's go ahead and declare this a mass casualty.
Welcome to Active Shooter, a podcast that covers the whys, the hows, and the aftermath of active shooter and mass casualty events.
They have an active shooter in the building. A second call says they are being attacked.
I've been shot. 16910 means we got shots fired at 4:15 at Route 291. Sounded like an automatic firearm.
Active shooter, reports of an active shooter
mass casualty incidents.
Thank you for listening.
You are listening to Active Shooter, a podcast that may contain adult themes, explicit language, and graphic depictions of violence. Portions of this show may be traumatic for those under 18. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome back to Active Shooter Podcast. Part 2 of our coverage of the Pulse Nightclub shooting will continue with a tribute to the 49 shooting victims and a review of the shooter's background. Thank you for listening. Akira Murray was the youngest of the shooting victims. The 18-year-old recently graduated with honors from West Catholic Prep and had signed a letter of intent to play basketball at Mercyhurst College. 19-year-old Jason Benjamin Josephat was born in Haiti before emigrating to the United States. An aspiring photographer, Jason also studied nursing at Valencia Community College. 20-year-old Luis Omar Ocasio-Capo graduated from Laverne High School in Tennessee in 2015 and was described by others as a compassionate friend, one who would listen, but also gave sound advice. Alejandro Barrios Martinez wore a perpetual smile and was simply a happy person. The 21-year-old was only living in Florida for about a year before the shooting, having emigrated from Cuba. Corey James Connell was a 21-year-old with big dreams of becoming a firefighter. The basketball and football player was described by others as reliable and was always a shoulder to lean on. 22-year-old Juan Romano Guerrero was working as a telemarketer while attending classes at the University of Central Florida. Peter O. Gonzalez Cruz was an enthusiastic UPS employee who thrived off making others laugh, especially when he would switch on one of the various accents he perfected mimicking. 22-year-old Louis S. Vilma was an employee of Universal Studios at the time of the shooting. He worked on one of the park's many Harry Potter rides, and if you saw him there, he probably made an impression. Always inclusive and exuding positivity are just a few of the ways his loved ones described Louis. 23-year-old Stanley Almodovar III was a kind-hearted person with an exceptional sense of humor who was known to keep others in stitches. He was working as a pharmacy technician at Avella Specialty Pharmacy at the time of the shooting. Jonathan Antonio Camui Vega was a diligent 24-year-old who was employed in audience management for Telemundo's popular show La Voz Kids, which is a show not unlike the American show The Voice. Yulmary Rodriguez Sullivan was a married 24-year-old mother of two precious boys who were her world. She was described by loved ones as devoted and thoughtful. Christopher Joseph Sanfeliz was devoted to his family and would do anything for them. The 24-year-old was a graduate of Tampa's Gaither High School before becoming employed with J.P. Morgan Chase, which is where he worked at the time of the shooting. Geraldo A. Ortiz Jimenez was from Carolina, Puerto Rico, and only happened to be in Orlando to attend a concert by his very favorite artist of all time, Selena Gomez. The 25-year-old was described as solicitous and genuine. 25-year-old Leroy Valentin Fernandez was employed as a leasing agent, but his true passion was performing on stage, particularly as a singer, which he often did at local restaurants and bars. 25-year-old Gilbert Ramon Silva Menendez was a cheerful person with a deep well of compassion for others, so much so that he had intended to return to school in September to become a nurse. Amanda Alvear, a former prom queen, was in school studying to become a nurse. The 25-year-old worked at a pharmacy and was recently promoted to lead pharmacy technician when the shooting occurred. Anthony Luis Loriano Dizla was described as, quote, lovely, kind, and respectful. A fantastic dancer, Anthony especially loved the tango, mambo, salsa, and ballroom dancing, which the 25-year-old did any chance he got. Enrique L. Rios Jr. was from New York City, but he was in Orlando to celebrate a friend's birthday. The trip doubled as a vacation of sorts for the fun-loving, lively 25-year-old. Juan Chavez Martinez, a 25-year-old native of Hidalgo, Mexico, was living in Florida for approximately a year before the shooting. He aspired to become a hairstylist. It was his passion. Juan was beloved to all. He went out of his way to help others any time the need arose. 25-year-old Tevin Eugene Crosby was a 2010 graduate of West Iredell High School. He was living in Michigan, but the business owner was in Orlando visiting when the shooting happened. Oscar A. Aracena Montero was a welcoming person who got along with anyone and everyone. The 26-year-old had just returned from a vacation in New York the day before the shooting. 26-year-old Mercedes Marisol Flores studied literature at Valencia College and was an ardent music lover. She was at the nightclub with her best friend, Amanda Alvear, the night of the shooting that stole them both from the world. 27-year-old Jean C. Nieves Rodriguez was born in Bayamon, Puerto Rico, but had been living in Orlando for an unknown period. Jean had proudly just purchased his first home and was teaching his 16-year-old sister how to drive, such important life moments that he will never get to enjoy. Frank Hernandez was a 27-year-old who had been living in Orlando for about 3 years leading up to the shooting. He worked at a local Calvin Klein store. Angel L. Candelario Padro was born in Puerto Rico and moved to Chicago to attend optometry school. At the time of the shooting, Angel was just about to join the Florida Retina Institute in Lake Mary, Florida as an ophthalmic technician. The 28-year-old was also a Zumba instructor. Antonio Davon Brown was a native of Cocoa Beach, Florida, and graduated in 2008 from the Florida Agricultural and Mechanical University, also known as Florida A&M, where he majored in criminal justice. The 29-year-old was known to be uplifting, and he had a wonderful sense of humor. 29-year-old Daryl Roman Burt II was an outgoing and friendly person who worked assiduously as a member of a young professionals group called the Jacksonville JCs. 30-year-old Eddie Jamal Droid Justice was employed as an accountant and was living in downtown Orlando. Eddie was a master with accessories, often incorporating pieces of flashy jewelry. 30-year-old Miguel Angel Honoredo was a married father with 3 boys, ages 15, 2, and 1. The manager of his family's restaurant, Miguel worked very hard so he could take care of his family, but also spend valuable time with his loved ones. Gerald Arthur Wright worked at the Magic Kingdom at Walt Disney World, and as you can imagine, he loved his job. He went overboard to make others laugh, which he always did. Gerald played hard, but he worked even harder. Simon Adrian Carrillo Fernandez was 31 years old at the time of the shooting. He was a watch enthusiast and enjoyed music and cars. Simon was a store manager for a local McDonald's, a position he earned by his willingness to step in and get the job done, helping others along the way. 32-year-old Dianca Deidre Drayton was known as a true friend you could count on, and she had a personality that drew others in. She had recently fallen on hard times, but Dianca put in the work and was getting her life back on track before the shooting. Christopher Andrew Lenonen, known to his friends as Drew, was a 32-year-old who attended Seminole High School and grew into a man who thoroughly enjoyed meeting new people and talking about movies. 32-year-old Joel Rayon Paniagua grew up in Veracruz, Mexico, but had moved to Florida a year earlier to work construction. Known as a loyal person, Joel was devoted to his church. 33-year-old Rodolfo Ayala was a biologics assistant at One Blood, which was a local blood bank. Known for his unique style, which included bow ties, Rodolfo was a prankster, and he had a larger-than-life personality. Shane Evan Tomlinson, a 33-year-old singer with a local cover band called Frequency Band, was an effervescent person who only knew how to live life to the fullest. Shane graduated from East Carolina University with a Bachelor of Science degree in communication with a minor in business administration. Martin Benitez Torres moved to Florida not long before the shooting. The 33-year-old, who was described as a genuine friend, was studying marketing at Sistema Universitario Ana G. Mendez. 34-year-old Edward Sotomayor Jr. was affectionately called Top Hat Eddie because he always wore a black top hat to local events. A bright light in the world, Eddie would do anything for someone in need. 35-year-old Xavier Emmanuel Serrano Rosado was a proud father to a 5-year-old son whom he adored. Xavier was a professional dancer, specializing in the salsa. Jean Carlos Mendez Perez was a 35-year-old man who was never down. How could he be when he spent most of his time finding new ways to make people laugh? The fitness enthusiast was born in Puerto Rico, although he had been living in Florida for an undisclosed amount of time. Eric Ivan Ortiz Rivera was a newlywed at 36 and had been living in wedded bliss with his husband for nearly a year before the shooting. Described as a, quote, goofball with a brilliant artistic side. Juan P. Rivera Velazquez was a 37-year-old native of Puerto Rico who was the owner of a hair salon in Kissimmee when the shooting happened. Pulse nightclub bouncer Kimberly Morris was 37 years old at the time of the shooting. Kimberly was a former basketball player at Post University in Connecticut. 37-year-old Louis Daniel Wilson was born in Puerto Rico and eventually landed in Florida. The manager of a local shoe store, Louis was extremely enthusiastic about dance. Louis Daniel Condi was a 39-year-old welcoming and attentive person who knew how to put others at ease. He was at the club on the night of the shooting, dancing and having fun with his husband and partner of 13 years. 40-year-old Javier Jorge Reyes was originally from Puerto Rico. Known as a comedian, Javier was incredibly talented in the arts with a special flair for makeup. Paul Terrell Henry, an outgoing and fun-loving dad to one son. He was said to be nurturing and compassionate, but mostly, he was a phenomenal dad. Brenda Lee Marquez McCool was a 49-year-old mother of 11 kids. She was known as the Cool Mom, which is simply no small feat with that many children. She made it work with an open mind, and she was amazing at it. Tragically, Brenda was already involved in a life-or-death battle with leukemia when she was shot. 50-year-old Frankie Jimmy de Jesus Velasquez was the eldest of the 49 shooting victims. Jimmy was a professional dancer, and he had traveled the world, dancing from one end of the earth to the other. A sociable man, he was happiest with others, dancing and laughing. Just to recap, there were 49 shooting victims, more than half of whom were under 30. These innocent people were in what they believed was a safe space, doing the things they loved the most, spending time with friends and loved ones, socializing, but mainly they were expressing themselves through dance. Best friends died unnecessarily that day. Lovers and spouses were ruthlessly murdered that day. 49 people who were celebrating their uniqueness and love were targeted and died that day. They were mothers, fathers, sisters, brothers, friends, confidants, and so much more than what this shooter tried to reduce them to. The sheer loss of life is as soul-crushing as it is infuriating. Nate was born on November 16, 1986 at the Long Island Jewish Medical Center in New Hyde Park, New York. He immigrated to the States from Afghanistan in the 80s. Nate's father became a naturalized U.S. citizen on November 17, 1989, which was many years after his father met his mother, and the pair married. The couple settled in New York and proceeded to start a family. They had 4 kids, including 3 girls and Nate. In 1991, the family moved to Port St. Lucie, Florida, where Nate was promptly enrolled in a program called English for Speakers of Other Languages. Nate's father was a financial broker whose savvy investment decisions afforded the family a rather posh lifestyle, with exquisite furniture and high-priced silk rugs. His mother was a wallflower, preferring to stay in the background as a homemaker who doted on her little family. Nate was very pampered and spoiled, and the role models he looked up to had their male privilege on display at all times. Nate's father had become involved in politics, even hosting a political commentary show, and he rather enjoyed making a display of the power he had. Power he wasn't afraid to wield over his wife, if he ever felt she stepped out of line. In December of 2002, Nate's dad called the police on his wife, reporting that she pulled his hair and pinched his bicep, all while cursing him out. He alleged that the bite on his bicep left a red mark, and he wanted her arrested and prosecuted. Nate's mom was arrested for domestic battery. However, the local prosecutor declined to charge the case. Between January 2005 and June 2016, Nate's dad was a secret informant for the FBI. He sporadically did informant work over the years, though the reason he was an informant and how he even came to be involved with the FBI is unknown. He founded a nonprofit organization in 2010 based in Port St. Lucie, Florida, and while he appeared outwardly to be philanthropic, he most assuredly exhibited problematic behavior, which seems to have trickled down to his son. Nate attended school in Port St. Lucie, Florida, including Mariposa Elementary School, where, in the 3rd grade, Nate's teacher wrote a progress report stating the following, quote, "Very active, constantly moving, verbally abusive, rude, aggressive, much talk about violence and sex, hands all over the place, including other children and in his mouth." In 7th grade, Nate was moved to a new class after multiple quarrels with other students. His grades began to slide due to, quote, "many instances of behavior problems." Former classmates described Nate as your typical bully, who was disrespectful towards females. Some say he thought he was superior to others. On the other hand, there are some who say that it was actually Nate who was bullied, not the other way around. It said that Nate was belittled over his weight and teased about his heritage. However, it certainly appears that Nate's parents were indifferent to their son's behavior, not taking any of it seriously. Indeed, there were reports from some of Nate's former teachers that his father, quote, "had a reputation for being disrespectful of female teachers and dismissive of complaints about his son." His lack of concern was further demonstrated in 1999, when Nate was in 8th grade and a teacher sent a letter to his parents saying that Nate, quote, "had an attitude and inability to show self-control." In 2000, Nate started at Martin County High School, although his attendance didn't last long. Not long after the school year commenced, Nate was expelled after getting into a fight during math class. The then 14-year-old was handcuffed and charged with a single count of battery, along with 1 count of disrupting school. The charges were later dropped, but Nate wasn't welcome back to school. For their part, the school stated that they attempted to guide Nate to making better choices and practicing self-control, but nothing ever stuck. Nate's dad always took up for his son and was never willing to accept or admit that his child was in the wrong. After his expulsion, Nate was enrolled in an alternative education program called Spectrum. The program was tailored towards students with behavioral issues. He seemed to perform well enough at the new school, for a short time at least. One classmate from this time described Nate as more of a prankster who would act out in class, but he wasn't a troublemaker. Yet, after the September 11th terrorist attacks, Nate stood up in class and cheered. It wouldn't be an appropriate reaction today, but this was 2001, so a swift response ensued, including calling Nate's dad to school. When he arrived, he smacked Nate across the face in front of everyone and took him home. Nate was suspended for 5 days as a result. It didn't take long before Nate found himself in another fight and was subsequently shipped to yet another school, St. Lucie West Centennial High School. That transfer wasn't successful either, and Nate was sent off to yet another school called Martin County Stewart Adult Vocational School, though the reason for this move is unknown. Nate managed to graduate from the vocational school, but it wasn't without several issues along the way. For example, he was suspended for 48 cumulative days due to fighting, several of which resulted in injuries to other students. From 2002 to 2006, Nate worked a variety of jobs, including cashier at Chick-fil-A, bagging groceries at Publix, Gold's Gym, Hollister Clothing Company, Walgreens, Nutrition World, GNC, and Circuit City. In case you weren't keeping count, that's 8 different jobs within 4 years. For the time, it's a wonder he managed to land any kind of job with such a poor employment history. Perhaps he was bullied. Nate became fixated with fitness and working out. he turned the extra weight into muscle mass, which Nate admired, so he began taking steroids, which he purchased online, along with a multitude of supplements and protein powders from GNC. Those who knew Nate recounted different versions of the same person. Some say he was very serious, while others claimed that he was a party boy who was always up for fun, including going to parties and underage drinking. In 2006, Nate legally changed his name, though research isn't clear on why. That same year, he made the decision that he wanted to pursue becoming a police officer. Like he did many other times that he set a goal, Nate became consumed with the need to become a cop. He immediately enrolled in the Indian River Community College and graduated in August of 2006 with a 2.76 GPA and an associate's degree in criminal justice technology. He crafted a MySpace page to include selfies wearing NYPD shirts. That fall, Nate quit working at GNC, leaving a handwritten note for his supervisor saying that he was leaving to focus on his police career. He landed a new job right away, working as a corrections officer for $14 an hour at the Martin Correctional Institution, an adult male prison located in Indiantown, Florida. He was hired on a probationary period and was required to take an oath as an officer. So on October 27, 2006, Nate promised to, quote, uphold the Constitution of the United States and the state of Florida, and to perform my duties faithfully and in accordance with my mission to ensure public safety. Following his typical pattern, Nate didn't last long in this new career. In April of 2007, he was terminated from his job as a correctional officer. The precise reason why is unknown, but those close to him say it was because he had made concerning threats towards the training academy. The time spent working at the correctional facility wasn't wasted time, however. Nate utilized his time in a very specific way, learning the ins and outs of the law enforcement side of the criminal justice system. He was able to attend a training academy designed for corrections officers, firefighters, and police officers at Indian River State College. There, he learned how to shoot with precision, and he became an excellent shot. Yet, because Nate couldn't help but be Nate, he got himself into trouble when, just after the Virginia Tech shooting, he asked a classmate if they would report him for bringing a firearm to the campus. The other student acted immediately, reporting the threat, and Nate was expelled from the academy. Officials cited Nate's actions as, quote, at best, extremely disturbing. While the incident was documented, Nate wasn't ever charged. In September of 2007, Nate was hired by a security firm based out of London called G4S. G4S is one of the largest security firms on the globe, employing over 623,000 across 110 countries. A part of his role as security included a permit to carry a concealed weapon, which further exposed him to the objects that he grew to believe provided the means for him to achieve the ultimate power of taking another life. Nate got married in April 2009 to a woman he met through an online dating website. She was a real estate agent from New Jersey, and she moved to be with Nate in Port St. Lucie, which is where they held the wedding. Initially, the couple lived with Nate's parents, and almost immediately, the physical and emotional abuse began. His wife claims that Nate was volatile and raged at her with open hands and fists for the smallest infraction, such as not finishing laundry. Nate spent most of his free time at the gym, so his wife wasn't privy to his secrets, like his increasingly extremist beliefs. The marriage didn't last long, and they separated after 9 months and divorced in June of 2011. A mere 3 months later, Nate remarried another woman he met online. His new wife was a Palestinian-American woman who was raised in Rodeo Beach, California, and it was a second marriage for each. The new couple moved into Nate's 2-bedroom condo in Fort Pierce, Florida. In September of 2012, Nate and his wife welcomed his first child, a son. On the surface, it was an idyllic time in their lives. Nate started visiting the Islamic Center of Fort Pierce, oftentimes with his son and father. His 3 sisters each volunteered at the mosque quite frequently and were well known there. Nate, not so much. The mosque's imam later reported that Nate kept to himself. He would arrive, pray, and then leave. It seems that perhaps Nate was harboring a few deep secrets, maybe even from himself. Though he was married, it appears he grappled with his own sexuality, and several people he knew from his days at Indian River Community College later said that they always assumed that Nate was gay, and were surprised to learn he was married to a woman. One such classmate claimed that Nate even tried hitting on him at a local bar. It was during a time when he was partying hard. He and several classmates would typically go to nightclubs after their late classes. Some reported that he met several people through gay dating apps such as Grindr and Jacked. On the other hand, there was clearly some deep confliction within himself because Nate also had an episode where he was faced with two men expressing public displays of affection, which utterly enraged Nate. During the time Nate worked for the security firm, he was caught making concerning statements to coworkers, which was enough to bring him to the attention of the FBI, who promptly opened a preliminary investigation into Nate. He was placed into the Bureau's terrorism database, but the FBI declined to comment on whether he was listed on a no-fly list. Nate was being surveilled by the FBI, who had begun recording his calls and seeking out confidential informants who could report on his level of radicalism. At one point, the FBI actually brought Nate in for questioning, and he confessed to making the alleged statements out of anger towards his coworkers, who had been making fun of him for being Muslim. The investigation was active for approximately 10 months before it was closed, and Nate was determined not to be a threat. Shortly after the case was closed, Nate was removed from the terrorist watch list. In July of 2014, Nate landed on the FBI's radar again after he was linked to a suicide bombing in Syria from May of 2014. In July of 2014, Nate landed on the FBI's radar again after he was linked to a suicide bombing in Syria from May of the same year. It was committed by an American who attended the same mosque as Nate, which is what brought him to their attention. It's unclear whether anything came from the alert. Nate legally purchased the weapons used in the shooting. Both were purchased 2 weeks before, at a gun shop in Port St. Lucie, in June of 2016. He also tried to purchase body armor and 1,000 rounds of bulk ammunition from a different gun store. However, one of the shop owners became suspicious and refused Nate the sale. One of the shop's employees claimed to have reported the incident to the FBI, but they say there is no record of the report. Sometime between the initial gun purchase and the shooting, Nate and his wife returned to the store to buy ammo. Between June 1st and 6th, Nate and his wife visited Disney World and Disney Springs. Interestingly, they visited during the Gay Days celebration, and this may have been a few of the many scouting missions disguised as a family day. Between June 5th and 9th, he transferred his share of a Port St. Lucie home to his sister and brother-in-law for a paltry $10. Only 4 days before the shooting, an imam at a mosque in Kissimmee released a video of Nate. He was praying, and the video went on that way. For 10 minutes. Why the video was released isn't known, but it certainly doesn't seem coincidental. Mere hours before the shooting, Nate visited his father, who later reported that his son didn't act strangely or out of the ordinary in any manner. That same day, Nate gave his wife $1,000 before she left the home to go visit her mother in California, which seems suspicious enough that the wife was charged criminally with being an accessory to a crime. A jury later found her not guilty, citing the prosecution's inability to reach the burden of evidentiary proof. Nate was buried in the Muslim cemetery of South Florida in Hialeah Gardens. His cause of death was multiple gunshot wounds, and the only substance found in his system was caffeine. It bears mentioning again, the FBI has been reluctant to label the shooting a hate crime. But the facts are the facts. 90% of the victims were LGBTQIA+, and 90% were Latino. The shooter expressed a distaste for the LGBTQIA+ community, and he displayed a very obvious allegiance to foreign terrorist groups. We all have the unique ability to help prevent such a catastrophic event from happening. If we keep our eyes and ears open and never hesitate to report when something or someone just doesn't seem right. With the delicate balance of mental health reform, education, active shooter training, and common sense gun laws, we may one day realize the dream that there will be no more active shootings. We pray that love will prevail over hate. In the meantime, we urge our listeners to stay aware of your surroundings and keep in touch with your loved ones. If you see something, say something. You never know how many lives you'll be saving. Thank you for listening to today's episode of Active Shooter, the podcast. Remember, if you see something, say something. There's no telling how many lives you may be saving. A big thank you to Darren Curtis,
who composed some of the songs on our show. You can find him online at www.darrencurtismusic.com. Make sure to check us out on social media. You can find us on Facebook at Active Shooter, the podcast, and on Twitter at Podcast Active. Thank you, and be safe.